Okay, so you've sent over a ton of stuff on product management.
Yeah.
Really focused on
The core.
like the nitty-gritty of how to make a product work.
Exactly.
And it's mostly articles we're looking at, that kind of lay out,
Processes.
yeah, processes, methodologies, like all the foundational things.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're going to try to do today is go through all of that
Okay.
and pull out the key insights.
I like it.
So you walk away with like a clear understanding.
A more actionable understanding.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Of all these different concepts.
Because you've got some good stuff in here.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It is. We're going to connect the dots for you.
Yeah.
So it's not just like knowing what the terms mean,
Right.
but how they all fit together
Yeah.
to build great products.
Yeah, so you can actually use this information to build something that works.
That meets users' needs
Yeah.
and your business goals.
Yeah, so why don't we start with design thinking? That seems like a good place to start.
That's a good one.
With all this material?
Yeah, your material really stresses that design thinking is a structured approach for finding innovative solutions. Like it's not just about like looks.
Right.
It's really a core part of making a great product.
So it's not just aesthetics. It's like...
Yeah, it's problem solving.
Yeah.
And one of the first things your sources mention is collaboration.
Okay.
Like working with designers.
Yeah.
And other stakeholders from the start.
So not just the product team.
Right, not just product.
Designers, engineers, even marketing.
Yeah. What's the thinking behind getting everyone involved so early on?
It's really about making sure everyone understands the problem and the goal.
So everyone's on the same page.
Yeah. You don't want to get to the end.
Right.
And have different teams with different ideas.
Totally makes sense.
It's about building a shared understanding.
Okay. And then there's empathy.
Ah, yes, empathy.
Which seems like a really important part of design thinking.
It's crucial. How do they recommend building that empathy?
By really understanding your users.
Yeah.
Their needs, motivations, challenges.
So you're really putting yourself in their shoes.
You have to.
Okay.
Because it's not about what you think is a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's about what your users actually need.
I remember reading about this one example.
Oh, yeah.
Where a team thought they knew exactly what users wanted.
Mm-hmm.
But then they actually went and observed users.
It's your natural environment.
Yeah. And it turned out they had totally different needs.
And that changed the whole product.
Yeah.
That's why direct observation is so important.
More than just assuming.
Way more.
Okay. And the third principle they talk about is experimentation.
Experimentation.
Which seems very agile.
It is.
So how do you actually use experimentation in design thinking?
By prototyping and testing quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Getting feedback from real users early on.
Right.
So you can adjust your product as you go.
It's like you don't have to get it perfect on the first try.
Not at all.
Which takes a lot of the pressure off.
Exactly. It's about learning by doing.
Now, the articles also mention that design thinking isn't a linear process.
Right. It's iterative.
Non-linear.
Non-linear.
You're going to move back and forth.
Between the different stages. So you might go from understanding to ideating.
Back to understanding to prototyping.
Back to ideating.
Exactly.
So it's very flexible.
It has to be.
Yeah.
Because you're constantly learning and adapting.
And they also make a distinction between design thinking and product thinking.
That's a good one.
So how are those two different?
Design thinking is really focused on solving problems for users.
Okay.
Especially in the early stages.
Okay.
It's all about what problems are users facing and how can we solve them.
Mm.
Product thinking is more about the big picture. Like the whole life cycle of the product.
It's more strategic.
It is.
Okay.
You're thinking about business goals,
right?
Market opportunities, the overall vision.
Not just about the users. Right. It's about the business, too.
Okay. So design thinking is like
a set of tools.
Fits within the larger
discipline of product thinking.
Exactly.
So once you've got that user-centric approach from design thinking, how do you really understand who your users are?
Yeah, that's where user personas come in.
Exactly.
They describe them as like fictional representations of your ideal customers.
Right. But it's not just making stuff up.
Right.
It's based on research.
Real data.
Yeah, you talk to users.
Surveys.
You look at data, and then you create these personas.
That represent different types of users.
Yeah, you want them to feel like real people.
And why are these personas so important?
Because they help you make better decisions about your product.
Okay.
Instead of thinking about some abstract target market,
right,
you're thinking about Sarah.
Okay.
A busy professional who needs to do this specific task.
Or David the student.
Exactly.
Who has this problem.
You have a much clearer picture of who you're building for.
And what they need.
So you can design and market the product better.
So you're always keeping the user in mind.
Always.
Okay. And then building on personas, you have user stories.
Yes.
Which are those short statements.
Like as a persona, I want a goal, so that reason.
That format.
It's simple, but effective.
And I think what's key there is that.
It's crucial.
Because you're not just describing the feature.
Right. You're explaining why the user wants it.
That's the motivation.
And that's what helps you build the right thing.
Solve the right problem.
The articles even talk about using user stories as a checklist.
Interesting.
To make sure you're meeting those needs.
Okay, so we've got our personas and our user stories. And then to kind of map out the experience, we have user journeys.
And user journey maps.
Yeah, which are basically
show the steps a user takes
to achieve a specific goal.
With your product.
And the maps are like a visual representation.
Exactly. You can see the whole journey.
And one of the things they say about the maps
is that they help avoid designer bias.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
Which is when designers design for themselves.
Rather than the users.
Exactly.
Which can be a problem.
It can.
So the maps force you to
see it from the user's perspective.
At every point.
Every touch point.
Okay, so you're really building a comprehensive understanding of the user.
From their profile.
To their needs.
To their journey.
Okay, now let's talk about actually building something.
Okay.
And that brings us to the minimum viable product.
Or MVP.
Which is basically
a version of your product with just enough features
to be usable
by early customers.
Okay.
So they can give you feedback.
So it's not like a finished product.
No, it's the bare minimum.
But it has to be viable.
That's the key word.
So it can't be completely unusable.
Right. It has to provide some value.
So you can get meaningful feedback.
Exactly.
And validate your idea.
The goal is to learn as quickly as possible.
With minimal investment.
Right. You don't want to spend months building something.
And nobody wants. So the MVP helps you de-risk the process.
But you have to be careful.
How so?
You don't want to make it too minimal.
Ah, okay.
It still has to be good enough to attract those early adopters.
So they'll actually use it and give you feedback.
Right.
Okay, so you've got your MVP.
And you've validated your idea.
I've got some feedback.
Now it's time to get into the details.
And that's where the product requirements document comes in.
A PRD.
Yeah, which basically lays out
everything about the product.
All the features, functionalities, requirements.
It's like the blueprint.
And what are the benefits of having a good PRD?
It prevents misunderstandings.
Okay.
Keeps everyone aligned.
The whole team.
And it keeps stakeholders informed.
So everyone knows what's being built.
And what to expect.
And this can really save you a lot of headaches.
It can.
Down the line.
I've seen projects go off the rails.
Because the PRD wasn't clear.
Exactly.
Okay, so then looking ahead, we have the product roadmap.
Yes, the roadmap.
Which is basically a plan.
For how your product will evolve over time.
So it outlines the goals.
The initiatives, the key features.
The short term, medium term, long term.
It gives everyone a sense of direction.
And the sources talk about the importance of predictability.
And adaptability.
So you need a clear plan.
But you also need to be flexible.
So it's a balance.
It is.
Okay, so we've talked about planning what we're building and when.
Now let's talk about how we actually get it done.
Efficiently.
And that's where Agile methodologies come in.
Agile.
Agile is all about breaking down big projects.
Into smaller chunks.
And delivering those chunks in short cycles.
Which are called sprints.
Right.
And this allows for more flexibility.
And faster feedback.
So you can adapt to changes.
Exactly.
And the sources list a whole bunch of benefits of using Agile.
Like faster time to market.
For reduced costs.
Improved communication.
Better teamwork.
More flexibility.
It's all about continuous improvement.
And delivering value to the customer.
In small increments.
Regularly.
And then Scrum is mentioned as a specific type of Agile.
It's a popular one.
So what makes Scrum unique?
It's really well suited for complex projects.
Okay.
And it has these short iterations called sprints.
Which typically last
1 to 4 weeks.
Okay.
And you have a prioritized list of work.
Called the product backlog.
Right.
And Scrum teams have specific roles.
The Scrum Master.
The product owner.
And the development team.
And they have these regular meetings.
Daily stand-ups.
Sprint planning.
Sprint review.
Sprint retrospective.
All about communication and improvement.
So both Scrum and Agile are about iteration and collaboration.
But Scrum is more structured.
With those defined roles.
And events.
Okay, so it's like a more specific framework.
Exactly.
Okay, now 2 other concepts that often come up with Agile are continuous integration
PI.
And continuous deployment.
CD.
And these can sound pretty technical.
They can.
So can you explain them in a way that's easy to understand?
Sure, think of CI like constantly proofreading a document.
As you're right.
Exactly. So developers are merging their code changes frequently,
into a central repository
and every time they do that, automated tests are run
to catch any errors.
early on.
So you're preventing those errors from becoming big problems.
Exactly.
Okay, and then CD builds on that.
By automating the release process.
So once the code has been integrated and tested,
It's automatically deployed
to the users.
so they always have the latest version.
Okay, so CI is about integrating code smoothly.
And catching errors early.
And CD is about automating those releases.
Quickly and reliably.
Got it. Okay, now let's shift gears a bit
Okay.
and talk about how we actually design the user experience.
Sounds good.
The articles mention UI/UX design methodologies.
So these are frameworks.
We're guiding the design process
They provide structure and principles,
to help you understand user needs.
generate ideas, prototype solutions, and test them,
And they mention the 5 elements of UX design
which is a really helpful framework,
for breaking down the user experience:
into 5 layers.
strategy, scope, structure, skeleton, and surface.
It's a good way to think about the different aspects of design.
Yeah, we can include a link in the show notes
Definitely.
for people who want to learn more about that.
Okay.
But the articles do go into more detail about UI and UX separately.
They do.
So let's start with UI.
User interface.
What's the main focus there?
It's all about the visuals.
Okay.
How the product looks and feels.
So like the layout,
The colors.
the typography,
the icons.
how it responds to user input.
All of that.
So a good UI is visually appealing,
Easy to use.
consistent with the brand,
Accessible to everyone.
and responsive.
Across different devices.
So it's about creating an interface.
That's both functional and beautiful.
Okay. And then UX is different.
User experience is broader.
Okay.
It's about the whole experience.
From start to finish.
The entire journey.
So you're thinking about,
User needs, behaviors, motivations.
you're doing research,
You're designing the flow,
the structure.
making sure it's easy to navigate.
You're testing it with users
You're creating wireframes, prototypes.
to visualize the whole thing,
The goal is to make a product that's enjoyable.
efficient, and meets the user's needs.
That's UX.
So UI is more about the specific touch points,
And UX is about the whole journey.
the big picture.
Okay.
Now, how do we actually know if we're on the right track?
That's where KPIs come in.
Key performance indicators.
These are metrics that tell you
How well you're doing.
against your goals
And the sources categorize KPIs:
into 4 areas
timeliness, quality budget, and effectiveness.
so you can track whether you're meeting deadlines,
Maintaining quality,
staying on budget.
and achieving your desired outcomes.
Exactly.
And can you give some examples of common KPIs?
Sure. You've got conversion rate,
Customer satisfaction.
net promoter score.
Those are just a few.
There are many more
But the ones you track will depend.
on your specific goals.
Right. Okay, so now you've got all this data,
Hmm.
and you have all these features you could build.
How do you decide what to focus on?
That's where feature prioritization comes in.
Exactly. You need to rank those features.
Based on different factors.
Like customer value,
Business objectives,
effort required.
technical feasibility.
So you're focusing on the most important things.
And the sources mention a bunch of different frameworks.
Really good scoring,
Rice method,
Kano Model,
story mapping,
Moscow method,
cost of delay.
value versus effort.
So many options.
There are.
Let's talk about a couple of them.
Okay.
The Moscow method sounds pretty straightforward.
It is.
How does that one
You
work?
categorize features into 4 levels.
Must, should, could, won't.
Exactly.
So must-have features are critical.
Essential for the product to work.
Should have are important, but not essential.
Right.
Could have are nice to have.
But not a priority.
And won't have are not being considered.
For now.
So it's a simple way to prioritize.
Very clear.
Okay, and then the Kano model.
That one's all about customer satisfaction.
Okay.
It categorizes features based on how they impact satisfaction,
So you have basic expectations.
which are things customers expect to be there.
And if they're not there, they're dissatisfied.
Right.
And then you have performance drivers.
Where more is always better.
Okay.
And then you have delighters
Which are those unexpected features?
that make customers really happy.
But if they're not there...
It's not a big deal.
Okay, so the Kano model helps you think about
Different types of value.
and how they impact the user.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've prioritized, we've built,
Now we need to test.
and that's where A/B testing comes in,
Split testing
where you compare different versions.
to see which one performs better.
So you might have different headlines,
Different layouts.
different calls to action,
And you show them to different groups of users
and then you analyze the data
to see which one wins.
so you can make sure you're launching.
The most effective version,
And the sources talk about different ways to do A/B testing.
like small-scale comparison, comparisons,
early access.
controlled beta tests.
So you can get feedback.
At different stages.
Okay. And then finally, we have the go-to-market strategy,
The GTM.
which is basically the plan.
For launching your product.
To the market.
It covers everything.
Your target audience.
Your value proposition.
Your marketing and sales strategy.
Your distribution channels.
Your pricing.
It's the roadmap.
For reaching your customer.
And achieving growth.
And what are some of the key things to consider?
When developing a GTM strategy,
you need to understand your customers.
Their pain points.
You need to analyze the competition.
The market conditions.
You need to consider your budget.
Your resources.
And you need to set clear objectives.
For your launch.
So it's a really comprehensive plan.
It is.
So we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From understanding the user.
To launching the product.
And the key takeaway here is
that all these concepts are connected.
They all work together.
To create successful products.
So as you think about all these different methodologies and frameworks,
which ones resonate with you?
Which ones are most relevant to your work?
What challenges are you facing?
What product ideas are you exploring?
Choose one or two principles.
That really stood out to you.
And think about how you can apply them.
To your own projects.
This is just the beginning.
Of a much deeper exploration.
Keep learning. Keep experimenting.
And keep building great products.
That's what it's all about.
Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.